All right, we're a little hot, so if we can turn down the volume in the back there, someone can feel creative.
It's probably because I'm a loud talker. At least that's what my wife tells me.
All right. Here comes Will. They're coming. All right, so I'm going to put some questions up on the screen so we get some things to work with here. We have heard a lot today, and it has been a ride, right? I think this has been pretty fun. So I appreciate everyone engaging. I appreciate the dialogue. I appreciate the debate. And I think we're seeing a lot of harmony. Like when Wendy was talking through that capability-based planning, that is exactly what we're doing in my company right now at Ecolab. It's all value streams down to capabilities, and it's starting to get real. And I think that's the differentiator. You can't spend $2 on people and process if you're not doing capability-driven planning. Well, you can, but you're going to spend it stupidly, right? I mean, it's just not going to work. So I guess, Rich, I'd love to start with you and kind of get each of us to weigh in on this one because it's a great question. Will, I'm going to be real curious what you share. Maybe share a little bit about yourself if you haven't already introduced yourself. We know who you are, Rich, since you just went. But what is real versus the hype?
Ooh, what is real versus that? I think that the reality that we're landing on is forcing us to look at value rather than the hype of the value that you could get. So 3 years ago in my organization, we tried to create a metric of what the value would be of creating a bespoke app for all our asset managers. And nobody now looks at what we said the change would be and says, yes, we've saved X hours a day, X days a month. Nobody believes that that's the case. And what is interesting is every asset manager says it wouldn't work if they didn't have that app. So that's the hype was how many days you're going to save, but the reality is it is going to make a difference. We've just got to make sure we understand how we talk about the difference it's going to make.
A friend of mine, Jeff Winter, he's a part of the group as well, jokes about where's the ROI? And he's like looking under couch cushions and checking under the desk. And like, has anyone seen the ROI? Steve, did you see the ROI? Like, it's just kind of the joke of the thing. But I think you look back and go, we have to do it, but we have to figure out how we monetize it and measure it. Will, what's real versus the hype? And maybe tell everyone who you are as well.
Hi. Will Everett from Walgreens, Chief Architect and Chief Data Officer there. And I said earlier I was a bit of the cynic when it comes to this stuff. I'm actually at the point where I think it's almost all hype. But it has more to do with where we are in the maturity curve than anything else. If I look back at where we were 15 years ago, 10 years ago in cloud computing, everybody solved it, they figured it out, and they said, we're gonna do it this way. And then 3 years later, they said, well, that was a terrible idea. Now we're gonna do it this other way. And then a few years later, they said, oh, that was also a terrible idea. So we go back and we try it again, and we're sort of in the middle of that phase 3 of it all. Yeah. The challenge I see today with AI and everybody has this willingness to adopt and this eagerness to adopt this stuff, and I just don't think we know where we're going yet. And I think the visions are good. I think the way we talk about it is very, very beyond, a little bit beyond the horizon that we can see today. I think when we start to get into the practical implementations, we as a broad industry are not ready. And I look at things like changes in prioritization from an architectural perspective. When we look at what was important to architecture 3 years ago, that's changing now. Now we have to look more at things like, do we do a better job of failure management? Are we doing a better job of looking at things like model drift? All of these nuances that didn't matter 2 years ago. And I don't know that we're mature enough yet. I believe we'll get there. I just don't think that's where we are today.
All right. And then one of the biggest anti-skeptics, the other Mike, Mr. Mike Carroll. Then we'll go to you, Mr. Mike Walker.
So I'm not an anti-skeptic about the technology. I'm actually in his camp. I'm a skeptic about us, which is what you're really saying. Exactly. Because I think the hype about the technology is largely aimed at us and our ability to figure out how to use it effectively for what it does, right? And what it's capable of. I think your discussion here about that lack of maturity is really our inability to understand what it can do, what it should do, and what it will do, all in the same sentence.
Well, and what we don't want it to do. And that's because I don't
100%.
And this gets back into the failure management thing, right? So the day we start putting decisions of consequence in play.
Irreversible decisions.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
You know, like here's some money to a customer, like be it a refund or whatever it is. As soon as that becomes material, now we've got risk that we may not be okay with having. And as exciting as it gets to say, hey, we can remove N number of humans from the process if we just automate this. It's like, yes, but you may not want to. Right, there may be a need to have that deeper. Someone was talking about human connection earlier. There may be an absolute need for that.
So let's you and I create a little tension here, right? Because
Sorry,
right, because we're going to do.
You haven't even got Mike Walker
So
involved yet.
Mike can weigh in on this one, right? There is this paradigm that it is easy for us to measure the things that we do that we make mistakes on because we can see the cost, right? And we know we make a mistake. The difficult part is when we don't make a decision and we don't do it, who owns that cost, right? That and that's the difficult part, and that's where we say, well, let's don't do it, but there's a cost to that to our company. And how do we start to get better at quantifying what that cost really is? Because if we understand the technology, we ought to be able to start to look at that. So
what is the table stakes, isn't it? Basically, if you're going to exist, what are the table stakes you've got to bear to continue to?
Mike Walker, weigh in. You get your full
guys.
name. We got another Mike here.
Yeah,
Hey.
Mike Walker. So quick introduction. The Reader's Digest version is spent the past 25, 30 years in the enterprise architecture, strategy, innovation management space. Recently was a VP at Microsoft, working with top life sciences companies around the world on some of the very things that we're talking about today. And, I love all the business capability modeling pieces and the strategy stuff. It's all very passionate, near and dear to my heart. But also was former VP over at Gartner. So when we talk about hype, I know a couple things about hype. Being the author of the Emerging Technologies Hype Cycle for a number of years. Yes, I apologize for the pain in which I may have inflicted upon you. And so with that, it's, over 5,000 engagements. I published 150 research notes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But now, and this is highly relevant to this conversation. So I decided to leave my cushy job at Microsoft. One of the top companies on the planet doing great AI stuff, to essentially open my own independent consulting firm where essentially I'm helping, folks that some of the challenges that I just mentioned in highly complex and regulated industries figure out how to de-risk generative AI. Huge issue. And a lot of this stuff that people are not even talking about because they're so buried in the hype. And so on one side, I'm doing that consulting work, and that's the reason why I'm not there today. I had my plane book, my hotel, et cetera, et cetera. But unfortunately, clients had other plans for me. And so on the second side, I've got an AI startup as well. And so I partnered with the chief AI architect over at Thermo Fisher. Double master's, PhD, 40 patents, smart guy. And we're directly targeting this issue of how to make AI safe, responsible, and so we don't do boneheaded things. So as far as the hype, in my opinion, here's the issue. What's not hype is the tech is moving faster than humans can absorb. There's an announcement every day of either one of the big players announcing something, or it's, a startup or what have you doing novel things. Second, we talk about doing strategy. And I love strategy. I love workshops. But as soon as we write this stuff down, it's out of date because it's moving so fast. Now, that doesn't mean that we stop doing great strategy work. It means that we have to not only focus on the strategy, but also the change management and fix the absorption level. But I'll leave you with kind of this pithy, and I've got a bunch of stuff to say here, but I'm going to cap it off here because I don't want to pontificate. Humans are analog. we're trying to live in an AI world. If we let that sink for a moment, how we make decisions as humans isn't from an Excel spreadsheet or an LLM that gave us a really great answer. It happens through emotion. So when you say that decision felt right, I mean, technically, that's kind of what's happening in your brain. But we have to remember that when we're making these decisions, that just having the data from an AI engine isn't enough. The human element is vital in the equation. And so the more that we can understand it, embrace it, and try to go Neuralink and all that great stuff, we need to balance. And so I'll pause there. There's other things that I can say about it, but those are some initial thoughts.
I think the same thing that my colleagues here have mentioned around the hype. The same thing that was the hype in cloud is the hype thing that's the hype now. It's the lemmings going over the cliff thinking they can just go spend some money and do some AI stuff. And the problem is they outnumber us like they do every other time, right? There's this really funny meme I saw online where there's this road that splits. And at the middle of the road where it splits, there's a bookshelf. And there's people that are grabbing a book and there's walking the lonely road that's kind of to a realization. And then there's the herd making a sharp left to the cliff, right? Let's make a huge cloud commit because the money's there. We'll figure it out along the way. And then you move the easy workloads and all the hard ones are there because you have to the goalposts are now spend as much in cloud as you can by this date or else. And you put yourself into these traps. So I find that the hype is always there, and it's the people that are doing capability-based planning and using AI as an enabler to drive the outcomes are seeing the outcomes. And I think that's exactly how I've seen many of us in this room and how I see Ecolab successful too. They pulled $250 million out last year. They're going to get $350 million this year. And it's because it's capability-based planning and value stream enablement with AI as one of the hows, not the only how. So I'm curious because we've been talking a lot about this agentic and reasoning at the edge. What's the cost of almost right? And Mr. Carroll, I want to start with you on this one.
Wow. The cost of being almost right.
Speaking specifically about an AI solution that's like, yeah, oh yeah, it looks good, right? Sure, we'll trust that. That can be the.
So if it's doing reasoning at the edge in the same way that we do reasoning at the edge, right? So what we do is as people, we take what we know to be true about things, and then we know what outcome we want, or we're trying to shape off in the future, and then we say, what interventions can I apply, right, in that world? We do counterfactuals in our head, and we say, all right, the next thing I can do that matters is X. Now, some of us try and apply temporal effect to that, and some of us don't, right? But we say that I'm going to do the next thing and hope to get the best causal outcome at some point in the future, right? And that's called agency. We're creating agency for ourselves because we're trying to shape that outcome. If it's an LLM doing that and it's reasonably close to you in time the decision's trying to be made, the cost of doing that on a reversible decision is not very, very high, right? If you are picking your wife, right? I'm on 44, right? And
AI didn't help you in that one. You made that choice on your own, worked out pretty well.
So here comes the judgment, and I'm going to be quiet now because you're going to speak about judgment, right? If the judgment factor is not there, then the costs get asymmetrically higher, right? Because what happens is all these externalities come into play further down the line that you hadn't thought about because you lack judgment.
So I agree with you. The thing that jumps out to me comes back to the failure management conversation, that the issue is your ability to identify that the problem has happened. And then we had a conversation earlier today. I apologize. I don't remember who the speaker was, but we were talking about context and context management, right? The idea of saying, does the agent on the edge have the appropriate context and the ability to react intelligently based on the decisioning processes we've given it, based on whatever this edge case, corner case happens to have been. And that's where if there's a disconnect, you may not see it for months. And the analogy I use for this is if Grant and I have a deal that says basically he gives me $1, I give him a donut.
Sweet
Right.
deal.
It's a good deal. It's a good donut, right? So, and we operate on this all the time. It's great. And you show up and you give me a Canadian dollar. And if the decisioning doesn't understand the difference semantically, you have a big problem. And the reason this is a risk is because, I'm a longtime SQL guy. The beauty of SQL is that it's, in my opinion, the most elegant language you can use, but also it can be syntactically correct and semantically wrong. And if anybody's ever done financial reporting using SQL statements, you will get an absolute result that does not reflect reality at all. And it gives it to you with confidence. It doesn't question it. It's like, no errors, here you go. Right? And I think that's the risk that we're dealing with now. It's the idea that the answer comes back, he gave me $1, I gave him a donut, but we may not see that for 3 months or until the bank shows up and says, hey, you're a little bit short here, what happened? Like we can't see that. And that's where the worry is. And again, this is not a reflection on the tech. It's on us. It's on us saying, are we ready? Are we putting the guardrails in place to make this happen? And if I can get 1 more minute, I want to talk about the diffusion of innovation curve, the idea of innovators, early adopters, early majority, late majority, and laggards. The other risk we have on this, the idea of using cutting edge technology, is we will create it for the innovator. We'll create it for the person that understands things like model drift and they understand things about challenges and context, which is great until they leave the room and the majority shows up. And now what we're doing is, and if you want to see this in practice, go look at microservice architecture 10 years ago versus last month. The train wreck of we are modern because everything is a microservice, using that sort of bizarre connection, is a reflection of this behavior. We gave an idea of microservices to people that didn't have the equipment they needed to solve the problem. I'm done now.
Go ahead.
I think there's something around culture in there though as well. So the times when it is wrong, if you haven't set the culture up beforehand to test, then the colleague never goes back to try it again because they've been burnt because it's wrong. We deployed Copilot. I'm sure Mike was thrilled at that point. We deployed Copilot across the whole of SEGRO, and we didn't do training. We just told people, have a go and see what happens. But a bit like you just said there around the innovative. So 450 people, 20% are using Copilot like every waking moment of their working day, but getting things wrong and understanding that sometimes Copilot would get things wrong. The rest turn up and start assuming it's just right every time. And they're banging out job descriptions with the wrong titles on and stuff, but just power and send.
Yeah.
You've got to be able to set the ability to understand when the bit that goes wrong, 10% of the failure. How do you catch that?
Mike Walker, what do you think?
So all great points. I agree with them. The Microsoft angle, even when I worked there, I was probably very critical of Copilot, and in a lot of ways still am. So not as impressed with Copilot. So as a bridge from the previous question to this question, and Grant, I agree that those folks that will succeed will figure out ways to leverage AI to make them more productive. Here's the challenge. I talked about that absorption factor and building those competencies, not just skill. I took a test and it was a multiple guess exam and I got a B. It's competency. I know how to do it. I practice it, etc. A fool with a tool is still a fool. What does that mean? Within generative AI, there's bias. You can say to it, hey, I believe this position, but I know my position's wrong. Provide me a compelling, bulletproof positioning to my CEO on why we should do this. And then we've got some challenges there. So that's more on the human dynamic side. That kind of gets the last point. I think depending on the problem is the more accurate way of asking this when we talk about the cost of doing it right. If we're talking about the operating room and figuring out where to make the incision, stakes are high, right? And so we have to take a step back and ask ourselves, what problem are we really trying to solve here? And based on that problem, what is the appropriate AI? we keep talking, in my opinion, when we talk about AI, we talk about in generality, right? And we just lump all of it together. But really, it's a family of technologies. And so, like with the work that I'm doing in highly regulated industries, someone mentioned the EU AI Act. In life sciences, there's Annex 22, which gives specific guidance on how to use agentic AI and generative AI. And essentially, the regs say, thou shalt not use probabilistic AI methods on life or death situations or, financial services transactions, etc. It's not allowed. You have to use deterministic methods. So now when we start talking about how we design our systems, it's not just a one size fits all, I've got a frontier model, let's go. No, because that is probabilistic in nature, and it's generating net new information that never existed before, that is translated by an engine. Rather, we want deterministic methods in there as well for that mission critical, those vital decisions. We want to be able to have that full traceability. And that's why advanced techniques like Lean-4 proofs are so important to layer into our architecture so that we can mathematically verify what that AI actually did. Instead of today in an LLM, it's a black box. I'm not sure how it got to that decision. Yeah, we trained it, but how did it really get to that decision? Now, I got two more points, but Grant, you're chomping at the bit to ask a question.
Yeah, I think I'm watching the reaction in the room, and we're seeing some of the other panelists react. So I'm wanting to get some other thoughts too. I think part of this is I certainly understand what you're sharing, but also there's indeterministic things in diagnosis of cancer and polyps that show up in your gut, and a lot of those pieces where there is a place for this in the medical world that we know actually adds quite a lot of value. So it's not black and white. Both things are true. Will, I saw you wince once or twice. Rich, I saw you grimace. What are you thinking?
I think everything you're saying makes a lot of sense. I think that we need to be careful. I like the idea of the deterministic versus probabilistic. And again, one of the earlier presenters had a great comparison between the two of saying, hey, do this or do this. So there was some very clear logic about how you wanted to approach it. I think that we have to find a way to build the guardrails in. I think we need to figure out, we can say, so here's the deterministic risk that the EU law has. What happens when your deterministic function is dependent on a probabilistic upstream activity? And so
or downstream.
Yeah. So, well, I mean, it depends it depends what we're evaluating, right? But if the
trajectory of the problem,
if the government is telling you that must be deterministic, but the dependency is probabilistic, then what am I now, right? and I think that's the question. So I'm not disagreeing with what you're getting at. It was just sort of in my head. The first thing that came to mind is now we're dealing with an environment that is going to inherently become complicated, not complex, because it's going to be complex no matter what we do, but complicated.
Yeah.
And if we don't understand it, we have a significant risk.
I think it's around I don't like using the word, but the agility of the guardrails as well. So I think what Mike said is bang on. It's really cool. But you've got to be able to apply the guardrails differently, dependent, almost fluid with the nature of where it's going, as opposed to let's decide what the guardrails are, the tools are, and now let's crack on. I'll see you in 5 years. But you need to almost have it around you the whole time to make sure that you're testing and checking back on all aspects of it.
That's it. Because the issue here is we don't want to put anything into production and then not check on it until 5 years later. This is not this stuff is now living. It's something we need to process and manage all the time. And if you're in a situation where you're getting a lot of regulations, the regulations continuously change. How are you adapting to those? Yeah. So right on.
Well, real quick, I'll just add real quick here, Grant.
Please go ahead.
This is why we want to make sure that we double down on the business capability modeling to properly assess and classify where those decisions are made, which now links to my risk model and my information model. AI is just leveraging information to create insights, right? So we have to understand that base data. If we can draw that red thread from what we want to do as a business in 5 years to the capabilities in which we'll need to enable that, to when we operate this, what's the risks around it? How do we govern it? And what information supports it? If we answer just those questions, these other bits become very straightforward, and we can have self-service governance where it's, hey, Wild West here, go forth in your sandbox, go for it. On the other end of the spectrum, well, we've got to ratchet it down because, we could be killing people here.
To point that way, that's where you are. Yes. We'll be right at time, so maybe we could just get a couple thoughts for those who have been in the room for the day. And I'm not sure, Mike, if you're able to dial into some of the sessions, but you kind of know the topic and the subject matter we're playing with here, so you probably can play in this too. Just a few words on like what your main insight is coming out of the day, and for people to kind of take home for them to move as we went from scanning and looking at the analysts and what they're saying. We went through some focus today, and now we're about to move into action. So as we make that pivot, first we're going to celebrate. We're going to talk about the network. We're going to talk about our winners for our awards. But as we move into dinner and we move into our social hour, it's time to start to think about action. So what words of wisdom? And since you're furthest away from me, Mike Walker, why don't you start and we'll go down the line and we'll wrap the panel there.
No, I mean, I was able to kind of come in and out of sessions, but what I really liked about the conversation is I didn't see a whole lot of hand waving. Folks seem to be very pragmatic about the current state of affairs. Had some really great advice. Like I said, I think the humanistic side is so important in the kind of the coexistence. There are going to be widespread economic challenges and role clarity, etc. But again, I think this is about how enterprise architecture is a discipline, and sometimes enterprise architecture is a bad name, and I've asserted that maybe we shouldn't even be using that as a term. But what we do as a profession is so vital to the success of these organizations being successful with AI, whether they realize it or not. And I think it just makes everything that we do that much more impactful. So thank you, everybody, for all your great insights.
Thank you, Mike.
I think the role of the enterprise architect has been the longest understanding that we are part of our business and we're not the basement guys doing IT. And I think one of the things I'd take from today the most is, if I think even back to last year, the amount of times people would have said business capability models or that side of it was higher than anywhere else. But compared to this year, it's been on practically every presentation, everybody's lips. How do we make what is done by people in this room be part of the answers to our business problems, not the thing IT does in the basement? I think it's just unbelievable for this profession.
I couldn't agree more, Will.
First of all, I'm super jealous of the business capability model you presented. It was really well done.
Cool, right?
And anybody who's tried to do one, the politics alone is amazing to try to navigate. I think that we as a profession are the linchpin to this being successful. If we leave it in the hands of business owners, and again, like our business people are getting more and more technically savvy, they're starting to figure out what to do. If they're left to their own devices, this is not going to go the way people want it to, I don't think. So I do think we are this is our sweet spot, big time in this space. I like the ideas that have been presented. Again, I hope we all walk away saying, okay, so now what does a solution architect on an AI project do? What's the thing and what don't I want them to do? And what belongs in a platform and what belongs in the hands of a business engineering team? Those are questions I think we need to be ready. I hope that when we do this next year, that we tell those stories, because if we don't, because the vision is great. I think everybody in the room has a vision of where we want to go. I think we've got to figure out, okay, what does it look practically on the field? I'm excited by it. It's certainly the most interesting thing I've seen in quite a while.
Mr. Carroll.
So I don't think you're a cynic. I think you deliberately try and create tension because we're trying to get to better questions, right? Because you can't fool me with that, right? And so my advice for all of us is, you have to deliberately create the tension because we're all trying to get this right. We're not trying to be right. And without that tension, we will not be successful at this. And the only way we get this right is that tension makes us work harder at solving this, because this is not easy. That it's not the technology. The tension has to be there to make us work harder at us, right? It's how we do this that makes it more effective. And we need to ask better questions about us in order to get there. So please keep making us ask better questions, right? And, right? And all of us take a lesson from him and deliberately create that tension so that we ask much better questions.
The last thing I'll build on from everything that's been said that I violently agree with is there's some folks who've talked about imposter syndrome at every level, right? Folks that I've met in the ranks, people in this room even, right? If we're operating from fear, we can't be curious. We can't be challenging. We won't learn. So I think it's critically important. We leave our ego at the door. We say, here's what I'm thinking. What are you seeing? We get curious, and we know that this is a journey that is about learning quickly, adapting, and adjusting. So we have to have that mindset if we're going to be successful, and we have to have friends. And that's what we have here in the network. So thank you for a fantastic conversation.